Hello, everybody. Hello. One person who also said hello. Oh, hey. How are we doing? Good, okay-ish. My name is Simone. I'm a program maker for the Read My World Festival. Are you enjoying yourself? Okay, so who's been here the whole weekend? See, okay, yes. Who has checked out some books? Who has made themselves a promise to not buy any more books? But then you saw the book market and you're like, you know what? See? Okay, like some of us. I haven't, but only because I haven't gone to the market yet, out of avoidance more than that I wasn't in the mood for it. Welcome. Uh, we're here at the Ode to Maryse Condé. Any people who are currently reading Maryse Condé? Okay, amazing. Listen. When you put up your hand, I will never call you to the front. So your hand can always go up all the way in the sky because you will never be. It will never be a pop quiz. But thank you for coming. We have an hour and 20 minutes, so we're gonna keep it. I'm gonna keep it super short. Bio is also super short, because as you know, it's raining, so we had to rearrange some things. So after this program, directly after, we have another book presentation. So we are on the clock. And I invited the most amazing people who all came in with stacks of books and requested if they can read something from said books. And if you know who they are, you know why you can never ever say no to them. So I didn't. Yeah, but we're first going to start by hearing a few pieces from interviews by Maryse Condé, and then Maboula Soumahoro, who is present tense co-curator of this year's edition. That deserves like a round of applause, I feel. She's going to read a piece by Maryse Condé. So the first reader is going to be Emily Mponza, who is I'm not going to look at her because I'm going to smile. She is a program maker, a researcher, and someone who I am happy is involved in the world of film, right? Okay. So then we have Jorabel Dombeli Lukoki, sorry, and who is an actress, not just any actress, she is phenomenal. She is still studying, but the moment she graduates, whatever movie she's going to be in, en masse, we're going to buy tickets. Whatever play she's going to be in, because she is absolutely stellar. So they're going to read pieces of the interview. Maboula, for those of you who haven't been here, so if this is your first evening, she's fantastic. She is a writer, a scholar, academic, but also very much a fashionista. All of these ladies, let me put that first, look amazing. They are hilarious and generous. Everybody's stellar. So we're first going to listen to a few pieces, and then we're going to dive in with a marvelous panel who I will introduce in a sec. Yeah, you ready? Okay, this is not going to be the quiet crowd. So if you hear something you feel like, oh, this resonates with me, you can do the finger snaps, you can make a little sound like, mm-hmm. Still rusty, I know, it's 4. It's 4 and you partied last night, it's okay. We'll get into it together. So first one, who I want to call up, Emily. Enjoy.
Hi, everyone. This is nerve-wracking, you know, but we're gonna go for it. Maryse Condé was once asked, out of everything written and unwritten, what story of yours would you like to be immortalized and why? She replied, I, Tituba, Black Witch of Salem, and Tales from the Heart, true stories from my childhood. They appeal to the lost paradise of the islands of the Caribbean and childhood. These words are also hers. I am not a writer of messages. I write first for myself, to help me understand and bear life. By telling stories that I deem meaningful, I hope to help others also, particularly my people, to understand and bear life as well. I shall go on joking. When I was a small girl, I used to roam my parents' country property at Sarcelles in Guadeloupe. Part of it was a forest where breadfruit, mahogany, and ilang-ilang trees grew, and I felt I was discovering the world. My parents brought me up with the idea that the world would improve. Although we came from a small and oppressed island, they were convinced that individually We, the children, were gifted enough to achieve miracles. In spite of the state of the world today, I still believe they were right. There's a French song by the group Téléphone that I like very much, which says that one day the earth will be round. Because of my education, I am a fervent optimist and believe that one day the world will indeed be tolerant and harmonious. I am not a writer of messages. I write for myself first, to help me understand and bear life. By telling stories that I deem meaningful, I hope to help others also, particularly my people, to understand and bear life as well. I believe that humor is the main tool of writing. A writer is not a sermonizer. A story should not be presented to the reader too seriously. You need to add jokes to make it more convincing. I have never known another language besides French. This is a translation, obviously. When I was a young girl, my mother forbade me to speak Creole and read to me bedtime stories by the Grimm brothers and Hans Christian Andersen, which made me think that all writers were foreign. Hence my favorite book by Emily Bronte. Then I discovered French writers and fell in love with them. But I have always said that I do not write in French. I write in Maryse Condé. I am not a writer of messages. I write first for myself, to help me understand and bear life. By telling stories that I deem meaningful, I hope to help others also, particularly my people, to understand and bear life as well. Translation has always been treated like a poor cousin and needs to be recognized in the literary landscape. I have a lot of irony all the time in my novels. Irony about ideas that are supposed to be said, but I'm always trying to find the reality behind the cliches. It seems to me one of the best cliches we have in the West Indies is the separation or division between races. And each of us behave according to a set pattern. Yes, there is a lot of irony in it. People don't like irony, especially in the Caribbean. They want a writer to say seriously what she or he believes in. They don't like people to mess around, give false images or false ideas. They don't like the writer to joke. So, I mean, if you joke, you are bound not to be understood and not to be liked. I shall go on joking. One day, I had a discussion with a friend of mine, a writer from Martinique, and we were wondering what is the most important element if you want to write a Caribbean novel. A novel that somebody will open and say, yes, it is coming from the Caribbean. He believed that it was language, that if you could deconstruct French and use a lot of Creole metaphor and images, it will be enough. My feeling was that only by capturing the very structure of the narrative technique could you make a Caribbean novel. You have to find the Caribbean technique of telling a story. A polyphonous technique, to mix chapters in the first person, chapters in the third person, to mix female and male voices. And especially mix the people who are supposed to be important, like M. de Lanceuil, who is a master. But in a society like the Caribbean, who knows more than the servants about the construction of society, the details of the society? Nobody ever asked them their opinion, but they are there, they are witnesses. They are the ones who see, they are the ones who arrange everything. Simply, a Caribbean story could not be really told without reference to servants. Don't forget that after all, as a Black person, I descend from the slaves. And the slaves were always silent, forced to be silent. They knew they were the real masters of the island. It was a way of giving voice to my people who were never given a voice before. So it was an artistic and political device. I am not a writer of messages. I write for myself first to help me understand and bear life. By telling stories that I deem meaningful, I hope to help others also, particularly my people, to understand and bear life as well. I shall go on joking. I cannot prevent myself from thinking about political ideas, political fight, political struggles, but 30 years ago I was convinced that the conclusion of the fight would be positive, that we shall get to liberation, that we shall get to the end of colonialism. Now I know that we have fought sincerely, bravely, and that nothing has happened, and okay, we have to face it. In a way, for it not to be too sad, I still have what I call a cultural political activity. At Columbia, for example, which is such a conservative place, I teach Caribbean literature in French. We speak about politics, about people like Aimé Césaire. I bring so many visitors from the Caribbean who give speeches and conferences, although I realize that without a plan, I can't achieve any political agenda. On the other hand, I'm trying to remain active. I'm not just sitting in my apartment, writing novels and going to the movies. I have written so many serious novels with a very serious concern and so on. So my next novel is going to be a kind of fantasy about a person who is not a human being, who is supposed to be a kind of she-devil, doing all sorts of harm and wrong around herself. Of course, there will be a political representation of Guadeloupe because it is set at the beginning of the century, around 1920. I shall have to deal with politics, but mainly it is a kind of entertainment. I believe that humor is the main tool of writing. A writer is not a sermonizer. A story should not be presented to the reader too seriously. You need to add jokes to make it more convincing. Since the wondrous and tragic life of Ivan and Ivana is a very sad story, I try to lighten the tone with amusing cultural references and a sense of humor. For example, Barbara, an intellectual French singer, is a favorite of a small choir of Guadeloupean women. And when a group of enlightened Haitians come to sing on the grave of Ivana, they launch into a song by a popular singer called Sheila about the three wise men. I believe that everybody and everything can be satirized. Life is a combination of joy and sadness, cruelty and tenderness, as well as satire and seriousness. I am not a writer of messages. I write for myself first, to help me understand and bear life. By telling stories that I deem meaningful, I hope to help others also, particularly my people, to understand and bear life as well. I shall go on joking. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Translation has always been treated like a poor cousin and needs to be recognized in the literary landscape. Every writer is jealous of the storyteller. There is in the spoken word a spontaneity that writing brings to an end. I wanted to remind my readers that I belong to a society where oral traditions are still alive, that my words convey a magical power, and that my story can be seen as a wonderful filter for emotions and knowledge. I was trying to say that people belonging to my part of the world do not simply write. They retain the power to influence deeply the minds of their listeners. My feeling was that only by capturing the very structure of the narrative technique could make a Caribbean novel. You have to find the Caribbean technique of telling a story, a polyphonous technique. The Caribbean world is a world where magic is everywhere and where things are not always logical. In Guadeloupe, the dead speak to the living and the visible speak to the invisible. The Cartesianism of the French is totally unknown. The writer is obliged to take into account her surroundings and reality and endeavor to find an equivalent in her work. Surrealism is an invention of European intellectuals such as André Breton. It seems that is what is left of my political involvement. I could not write anything, although I write an entertaining fantasy novel, unless it has a certain political significance. I have nothing else to offer that remains important. I could not write something with no meaning. I could not. After all, the people who taught me how to write, who gave me this desire to become a writer, were politically motivated. They were saying something in the defense of our people, or to enlighten our people, to raise their consciousness, to make people in the world know how unhappy and oppressed they are. The legacies and the lesson, you cannot forget about that. The translation has always been treated like a poor cousin and needs to be recognized in the literary landscape. The book that inspired me to write Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, it appeals on universal, but because it speaks of revenge and unrequited love. Emily Bronte touched my heart and mind when I was a child in Guadeloupe, thus proving the force and magic of literature. Consequently, I adapted into a Caribbean setting under the La Migration de Cœur in French and Windward Heights in English. Jude the Obscure by Thomas Hardy for the same reasons as above. Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe because it was the first book I read on the ravages of colonization. When I write Windward Heights, I am rewriting a book which could be a Caribbean book. With a few transformation, Emily Bronte is a voice that I know well. Translation has always been treated like a poor cousin and needs to be recognized by the literary world. A writer is a dreamer. A book is the fruit of her imagination, complex and full of diverse ideas. There is a magical relationship between Tituba and me. One day, when I was searching for books at the UCLA library, and Petrie's book on Tituba fell into my hands. That is how I got to know the story of the Salem witch trials. The bond between Tituba and me has never been found again in my writing. Creative writing programs are an invention of American universities. In the Francophone world, we believe that the power to write is a gift which cannot be taught. My fondness for writing comes from knowledge of literature from different parts of the world. It is by reading certain authors that I learned how to write and influence my readers. I have never studied otherwise. Reading for me is my master. Because of my loss of vision, I had to dictate the text, the gospel according to the New World, to a friend as well as my husband. This obliged me to write each chapter in my head. I was sensitive to sound and meaning because the writer is also a musician. The process was delicate and complex. I endeavored to give to the person I was dictating to the version I had written out in my head. I prefer to dictate my thoughts in the afternoon, after I have developed them in my head during the morning. Before I lost my eyesight, I used to work very early in the morning at my desk on my computer in Guadeloupe with the view of the volcano, La Soufrière. I have often said that working with my husband and translator, we become intimate and very, very intimate enemies. For me, I feel dispossessed of my work when it was translated, but I confess the part I am always excited to be introduced to my English-speaking world. We both work apart, except for Rich's occasional questions, and I feel confident that his translation is a faithful mirror of the French text. Some years ago, when I went to Africa, race was all important. I was going to Africa because I was going to meet my people. I was going to find my true home. And when I got there, I discovered that, in fact, I had little in common with the people of Guinea, as I was in French Caribbean. So, what I put first is the question of culture. Now that I live in New York, for example, I relate socially mainly with people from the French Caribbean. For example, Edwidge Danticat, who is a Haitian writer, is a friend of mine. I see now that culture is the most important thing, and you would be surprised. Some of my closest friends are from France. Why? Because of the language. I discovered that language is not something unimportant. In fact, it is essential that you communicate with somebody in your own language. I believe that humor is the main tool of writing. A writer is not a sermonizer. As a story should not be presented to the reader too seriously, you need to add jokes to make it more convincing. Translation has always been treated like a poor cousin and needs to be recognized in the literary landscape.
Good afternoon, everyone. Des nègres aux yeux bleus, cela mérite explication. Il nous faut pour cela remonter encore en arrière. C'est bien connu, c'est le passé qui nourrit et éclaire le présent. Le premier ancêtre de Tekla qui eut les yeux bleus s'appelait Wangara. Il plafonnait à 1,58 m et légua à sa descendance sa taille réduite ainsi que la couleur de ses yeux. C'était le fils de Makalou et de sa troisième femme, Fatoma. Bien qu'ultérieurement baptisé Joseph dans la servitude, Wangara garda toujours son nom africain. Il avait été capturé sur la côte des esclaves, à un endroit appelé Sosonabou, fertile pour les razzias. Il devait être âgé de 15 ans, soutenaient les anciens, même s'il en paraissait à peine 12. Il se souvenait qu'il était né lors de cette saison sèche, si brûlante que les incendies naissaient spontanément dans la brousse et que des boules de feu roulaient sous les pieds des chasseurs. Malgré sa petite taille, il avait fait ses preuves en matière de bravoure, ayant tué 1, 2 ou 3 lions de Mourga, les plus féroces, ceux dont parle Amadou en Patéba. Il en nouait les queues autour de ses reins. On s'apprêtait à le marier et le conseil des sages discutait de la dot de la promise. Ils n'eurent pas le temps de s'accorder sur ce point, puisque, une nuit, les négriers européens et leurs aides africains portèrent le feu et la destruction à Sosonabou. Jugés trop vieux pour supporter les épreuves du passage du milieu, les Anglais disent Middle Passage, les noms varient, mais c'est la traversée qui va du bonheur de l'Afrique à l'enfer des Caraïbes. Makalou et Fatoma eurent la gorge proprement tranchée. Témoin de la scène, Wangara pleura, pleura, pleura. Il pleura tellement que ses prunelles changèrent de couleur comme un linge dont la teinte ne résiste pas aux lessives. Ainsi de brunes, elles virèrent au bleu. On ne s'aperçut pas tout de suite de cette métamorphose, car le malheureux Wangara restait prostré de douleur à fond de cale du négrier Christ-Roi. Mais au 5e jour sur la mer, les marins le forcèrent à remonter sur le pont pour ôter sa vermine en l'inondant de seaux d'eau. Dans la lumière du plein soleil, ils se rendirent compte du changement. Cela les amusa considérablement. Un nègre aux yeux bleus. Oh, miracle! Le capitaine, Antoine de la ville Jégu de Saint-Martin, lui, ne ria pas bêtement. Il supputa l'énorme bénéfice qu'il tirerait maintenant de cette anomalie. Les autres esclaves, compagnons d'infortune de Wangara, apprécièrent la chose différemment. Ils y virent un signe de la dilection des yeux. Ces yeux-là signifiaient que Wangara n'était pas un vulgaire mortel. Il était capable de lire le passé, le présent et de déchiffrer l'invisible. Désormais, ils l'accablèrent de marques de respect, se prosternant devant lui et ne prononçant plus son prénom qu'ils remplaçaient par des périphrases alambiquées du genre « celui dont la tête atteint le ciel »,« celui-là dont les yeux percent la nuit »,« celui qui a la stature du rognier ». Cela irritait fort Wangara, qui ne pouvait plus exprimer son chagrin en paix, constamment dérangé par des supplications ineptes. « Ô vénérable, fais-moi voir mon défunt père. Ô suprême, fais-moi embrasser et serrer de nouveau dans mes bras ma défunte mère. Ô lucide, sais-tu ce qui nous attend au bout de ce terrible voyage qui semble n'avoir pas de fin? Ô clairvoyant, et quelle terre allons-nous aborder? C'est peu probable que le bonheur nous y attende. » À son arrivée aux Antilles, Wangara fut acheté par le sieur Emmanuel Breston de la Taille. Emmanuel aimait les garçons, petits. Il jugea que celui-là méritait mieux que d'être un nègre sucrier ou un nègre de houx. Il le vêtit d'un habit de brocart de soie et l'employa comme nain de table, chargé de brosser et de ramasser les miettes. Par jeu, il le maria à Batista, l'esclave favorite de sa fille qui venait du pays Maasai, mesurait près de 2 mètres. Les voies de Dieu sont impénétrables. Le couple s'aima passionnément et eut coup sur coup 5 enfants aux yeux bleus et d'une taille fort au-dessous de la moyenne. Cependant, quand la femme d'Emmanuel, la douce Éléonore aux bras blancs, puis 4 de leurs garçons furent emportés par un mal mystérieux, quand la même année le feu prit dans ses cuisines et ravagea son habitation, le maître se méfia de ses yeux et de cette petite taille qui autrefois l'avait tellement séduite et amusée. Il se hâta de se défaire de Wangara et Batista. Ceux-ci furent rachetés par le ladre Louis-Élie Trémond de Saint-Mauro, un rustaud qu'une couleur de prunelle, si singulière fut-elle, ne saurait impressionner, et qui expédia la paire aux champs. Louis-Élie était un pervers. De nos jours, on l'aurait appelé pédophile. Friand des gamines impubères, il convoitait la fille de la lingère. Le soir où il s'introduisait dans sa chambre avec la ferme intention de la violer, il fut saisi de nausées si violentes qu'il prit une glissade fatale dans son vomi et son caca. On arrêta Wangara. À travers la colonie, il ne faisait de doute pour personne qu'il était un jeteur de mauvais sorts, un quimboiset, responsable de ces étranges événements. Wangara ne se défendit pas. Pas un mot ne sortit de sa bouche. Il fut pendu à une branche basse d'Acoma, arbre aujourd'hui pratiquement disparu de la Caraïbe, et il emporta avec lui la réponse à la question que tous, de génération en génération, se posèrent. Les Minerves, à l'abolition de l'esclavage, un officier d'état civil facétieux avait doté les descendants de Wangara de ce patronyme un rien somptueux. Étaient-ils des sorciers? Le mystère jamais résolu alla s'épaississant. Ce qui compliquait encore les choses, c'est que tous les Minerves, s'ils étaient de petite taille, n'avaient pas les yeux du même bleu. Ils les avaient tantôt tirant sur le caco, comme on dit communément, ou gris ou mauve. Cela signifiait-il qu'en fonction des individus, le don surnaturel était variable? D'une manière générale, ça se passait ainsi. La couleur, incertaine pendant les premiers mois, voire les premières années de l'existence, un beau matin virait au bleu. Se penchant sur le berceau, les observateurs recevaient en plein visage une giclée comparable à l'eau de mer au large de la Désirade ou à ce parfum de Davidoff que l'on surnomme « cool water » ou encore à ce rhum martiniquais des plus rares et des plus coûteux. Cette couleur allait s'affirmant au cours des mois qui suivaient, s'imposer, et un jour les passants s'arrêtaient, interdits. « Non mais, tu as vu les yeux de cet enfant ?» N'eussent été leurs regards extraordinaires, et leur taille lilliputienne, les Minerves auraient été des natifs natals, pareils à tant d'autres. Ni plus beaux, ni plus laids, ni plus intelligents ou plus obtus. Parmi eux, pas d'écrivains notoires, ni de peintres ou de sculpteurs de génie, même pas de docteurs, d'avocats, de hauts fonctionnaires. Bref, c'était en général des petits commerçants, des gratte-papiers en tout genre. Pourtant, les histoires les plus farfelues circulaient sur leur compte. On chuchotait qu'un Minerve aurait été compagnon intime de Delgrès, celui qui aurait conseillé le feu d'artifice final à l'habitation d'Anglemont. « Partons en beauté » aurait-il susurré à l'oreille de l'officier, pusillanime malgré ses galons. « Gravons nos noms en jambage de feu dans la mémoire des habitants de ces îles, voire dans celle des hommes du monde entier. » Certains assuraient qu'un autre Minerve était responsable de la triste fin de Richepanse, pris de terribles coliques avant d'être terrassé par la fièvre jaune. Thecla aurait bien voulu trancher la question, savoir si elle possédait un don surnaturel. Ah, déchaîner le vent, faire tomber la pluie, surtout expédier ad patres ceux qui se moquaient d'elle et la traitaient de volant. Sa mère, dévote qui redoutait les péchés mortels et véniels, refusait d'entendre ces interrogations. Son père, très petit homme, au chef perpétuellement coiffé d'un casque colonial, les yeux abrités d'épaisses lunettes noires, était préparateur en pharmacie à l'hôpital. Nombreux étaient ceux qui se pressaient chez lui après le travail. Sur quoi le consultait-il? Pourquoi ces mystérieux rendez-vous? Thecla ne tarda pas à découvrir qu'il organisait un juteux trafic vendant sans ordonnance de la morphine, de la pénicilline ou autres médicaments précieux qu'il dérobait à l'hôpital. Elle aurait préféré un père sorcier à un père voleur. C'est tout de même plus noble. À ses 23 ans, au beau mi-temps de ses études de droit, lasse de se torturer avec des questions sans réponse, elle planta là les Dalloz et décida de chercher du travail en Afrique noire que personne n'avait encore rebaptisé Afrique subsaharienne. On peut dire que ce fut par militantisme. En ces temps-là, c'était le mot à la mode et il est certain qu'elle avait le cœur à gauche. La vérité pourtant est qu'elle haïssait sa famille, la société où elle était née, qui l'avait toujours ostracisée. Elle rêvait de respirer un grand bol d'air. Elle se satisfit du premier pays qui avait besoin d'expatrier, le Mali. N'y voyez donc aucune quête d'identité, aucune recherche d'ancêtres Bambara. Thecla n'avait jamais entendu parler du royaume Bambara de Ségou, même si elle devait épouser un descendant de Yerewolo. Dernier détail, la paye était bonne.
As you please, as you like. Thank you so much for reading. Yorbel, Emily, thank you so much for your gorgeous pieces as well. You can see that we have been joined by two amazing ladies. On the far right, your left, Ayan Abukar, who is a writer, a program maker, and a journalist, and you've been here the whole weekend, and we've sat next to each other and had so much fun. So thank you so much for joining. Applause for Ayan. In the middle, someone who I think needs no introduction, but we will introduce you nonetheless. Let's say that you are Chief of Anthropology, Chief of Gender Studies, Professor Gloria Wecker. And as you can see, they came with all their books on Maryse Condé. And I asked Ayan and Professor Wecker the question if they wanted to bring a text that somehow reflected the mood of this week. So we're transitioning into autumn, which we hope will be a better period than what we just had. If you look outside, it's basically already autumn. And Ayan gave the following text from the book, What is Africa? To me. I launched into a fake argument. Ever since my mother died, Guadeloupe no longer meant anything to me. I felt free to explore elsewhere. For the time being, something was keeping me in Africa. I was still convinced that the continent could offer me a wealth of treasures, such as? Arlette listened to me patiently, then shook her head. You want to stay in Africa, then stay. You've taken leave of your senses. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? Do you have a mic? Yeah, sure. I don't think you. Oh, thank you. The suspense, the suspense. Thank you. Applause for my colleague Bram.
Test, yes. First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be among all of these amazing inspirational writers and thinkers, and Professor Gloria. I'm sitting next to Professor Gloria, so for me this is also a special honor. Thank you so much. Back to the quote. So this is a quote from her book, What's Africa to Me? And I found the whole book actually very interesting because she wrote it a while ago, and it's about her early years when she spent a lot of time in, I think, Ghana, Guinea, and maybe Senegal, and also maybe Ivory Coast. And so she describes actually how she felt as a Black Caribbean woman from France, and trying to figure out actually what's Africa to her. And I think that's a question that's still very much relevant and valid for a lot of African diaspora community. Like now, especially I think nowadays when we see the rise of extreme right and all this, feelings of are not rooted, in the Dutch society. And it's also one of the themes of my book also, going back home, and always the question being an inside outsider, and how can you connect with this fantasy or the myth of the reality of the complex reality of Africa.
Ayan's book, I'm so happy you asked, is right here. As I hold it up, maybe you can tell something about it. Hotel Mogadishu?
Sure, maybe shortly. It's a nonfiction. It's about my time in my birth city, Mogadishu. I lived there in 2014, and I worked also for the Somali government, and Somalia was coming at that time from a very long civil war. So I describe in the book actually the life in the city, the lives of the people. But at the end of the day, it's also a book about belonging and the search for, I think, the search for a home in Africa. And Africa for me is very specific, is Somalia.
Thank you. And the book is to be bought here after, so I hope it's going to be sold out by the end of the afternoon.
You better, yeah.
Yeah, right? I mean, come on, look at her. I think you should. Professor Wecker, she's already in the book, so this one is already sold. Also asked you to be part of the Ode, and you said, I'm going to read all the books, reread them. And you had a beautiful conversation with Ms. Domenica Guidai-Bidu, who will join us shortly, about the influence of Maryse Condé in the Netherlands in the 80s. And maybe you can tell us something about that, but also the fragment that you brought for us. And maybe you want to share some of your illustrious notes on the lady.
Okay, so 3 questions. So yes, Domenica and I were thinking back of 1984 when Segou appeared in the Netherlands. It was published by Rainbow Pockets. It was a splash. She suddenly appeared on the scene and everybody was reading her. So I was talking to some white friends about this, So they had the double volume in their home in Amsterdam, but then they also had a pair of books in their home in France. So also white people were reading her. And of course, we were so thirsty for black female literature that every one of my friends read it too. So it's an amazing experience to now, after 40 years, reread it and find out some stuff. But maybe we can talk about that later.
Definitely.
What I discovered. So then, your second question. Can I
If
read
you
a-
can read the expert
Yes.
that you...
Okay, so I had a couple of quotes, but I'm going to read one that to me illustrates the point that Yori Bell made from interviews with her about the centrality of humor in her work. So I'm reading a piece from Crossing the Mangrove, which is a frame story in Dutch, een raamvertelling. So there is one central story and there are all kinds. This person has died, who is a very strange figure showing up in a village, Rivière-aux-Selles. Nobody knows anything about him. Some people are attracted to him in the village. Other people are very hateful towards him. And then suddenly he dies and people come together at a wake. And so we follow each of these persons around him. And now in the first chapter, she's introducing all the people who come to the wake. And it is hilarious. So I'm going to read a very short piece. Shortly after Myra came Lucien Évariste, commonly known as the writer, although he had never written a word, and Émile Etienne, commonly known as the historian, although he had only published one pamphlet that nobody ever read, entitled Let's Talk About Petit Bourg. The first arrived from Petit Bourg by the bus Christ the King, whose driver made a detour and shut off the engine to come to a silent halt under the roof of trees while he hurriedly crossed himself. The second drove up in his familiar Peugeot.
Thank you. And Maboula, you were smiling because I remember when we had dinner with Willemijn before we started. It was actually the beginning of the Read My World process for this edition. And one of the things she said was how hilariously funny Maryse Condé was. So she was your mentor. Maybe you can speak a bit on it.
Yes. I'll begin by saying again, this is my last opportunity. So thank you, Read My World, for this invitation and beautiful experience. And I'm so happy to be part of this conversation today and this tribute to Maryse Condé, which feels a little bit strange for me to be now talking about her, with her having passed away last year. So it's a different positioning toward her work. Like, she's no longer there, and I seem to be realizing increasingly the impact of her legacy on me personally, beyond what Gloria just described, the impact of her books or the bestseller that Ségou was back in the 1980s, and the academic career, international academic career that she's had, and the prizes and accolades. But now we are talking about her without her presence. Perhaps to answer your question, of course, humor has been highlighted by all the people, the readings, the people who have been talking so far, and I think that in the excerpt that I selected, I felt was an interesting, and to me, really personally, I'm not talking intellectually, academically, but to me, it is the best or the most faithful rendition of the scope of Maryse Condé. Because in that narrative, that is simultaneously, sad, historically accurate, filled with, references, there's still humor. The story of this guy, this enslaved man who was short, very short, who was forcefully, and that matters, right? That is when the atrocity of the situation and the representation of the institution of slavery was forcefully married or coupled with this tall Maasai woman. And it's like, what are the Maasai doing in this history? But okay, we'll take the Maasai. And then this enslaved man was, found guilty of committing crimes, and he was he was hanged. This little tree, you know what I mean? Like she said, because he was short, so we only needed a little tree, a small tree to hang him. So why spend so much time, why resorting so systematically to humor while describing, this history of the transatlantic slave trade and the institution of slavery throughout the Americas? And she does it systematically. If you read Erin, her first published novel, it is a very dry tale of a woman who is not Maryse Condé, of course, as we know, a woman of Guadeloupean origin who finds herself in an unnamed African country in the post-independence era. Yes, the narrative is, again, simultaneously very, sharp, accurate, but also funny. I'm not going to be this African woman with, I don't know, 10 kids. Or I don't like the way they treat women over here. Oh, yes, this cruel minister of the interior is really, doing a lot, negative things in the country. But my God, it's so hot. It's so hot. I'm just going to have, a steamy relationship with him, and there's a lot of sex. So it's always, to me, what works best is her mastery of different levels or different layers in the storytelling, right? So the reason why I selected this particular excerpt is because in those 7 pages, she gives her own understanding of this African diaspora, but that includes multiple issues, and that includes all the angles that she's interested in, right? So if she was so dry in her first publication, and that began with Erin, I think that there was a misunderstanding from the beginning where people were not always happy to have this rendition of post-colonial Africa. And a few years later, she comes back with Ségou and asserts herself as saying, as a Caribbean woman, as a Guadeloupean woman, I have the right, I have a say in the storytelling of the African diaspora. And if you thought that I was being too light, too superficial, I'm going to publish this, 2-volume massive novel. There's no question of the historical accuracy of that novel, and I'm just going to assert my right to talk about the story the way I want to talk about the story, right?
Can I ask Maboula a question?
Of course.
Yes, because I've been dying to know. In the book I Tituba, she has a very elaborate interview at the end. There she is saying that she is somewhat disillusioned about how Ségou was received by Africans and Africanists.
Yes.
But she doesn't explain what the criticism was. Can you say something about that?
I think the criticism there was some harsh criticism, but I think that the underlying issue was her positioning. It was also a questioning or challenging of her authority. Like, could somebody from Guadeloupe, could somebody from the diaspora, could somebody from the Caribbean, publish this massive work? Like, who was supposed to represent Africa? And that was not supposed to be her. And also because she's, she uses the trope of a family to talk about this dispersal that created the diaspora. And you get into, let's say, family secrets, and you say things that are not, that are problematic. You said that you just reread Ségou recently, and there are lots of things in Ségou, in the story that is told and shared that are problematic, and also in the way she rendered that story that can be, gender issues, women, a depiction of
really,
women. It's
you really wonder whether she would have written that today. Because the men are kind of raping
everybody
all over the place.
Yes, all the time. Yeah, rape is really the recurring weapon used by men throughout the storytelling. But I think that the issue of rape is her metaphor for the abuse, for the mistreatment. But it may be unfortunate that she used rape to illustrate that. So, but to answer the question, at the time, the issue was, who are you to tell that story? And who are you to appear so, let's say, definitive about this history of the African diaspora? And you're a Caribbean woman, and you're Guadeloupean, and let us handle those African matters.
Leave it to us.
Yes, leave it to us.
Especially men, of course.
Yeah, especially. And she never cared. She never cared. But I think she still was hurt, but that didn't change her position on the topic, and it was too late,
It was out there.
Yeah, it was out.
Yeah. Okay.
Professor Wekker, you have read it, you said in the 80s, also with Mevrouw Domenica, not together, but you had your conversations about it. And what has changed for you now that you are rereading it? You talked about, like, for example, now Ségou,
Yeah.
but you have been going through the whole stack.
Yeah. I mean, I am most impressed by the fact about how I knew nothing when I was in my 30s and read it. I had no clue. So now rereading it, first of all, I've been to the places that Maryse is from. I've been visiting the French Caribbean, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and also this tiny little island, Marie-Galante.
Yes.
I've been there in around Christmas 1999. There were no cars there.
Yes.
So you felt like you were in the 18th, 19th century because everybody was using as transport a horse and a carriage. No taxis, nothing. Also no cars of the inhabitants of the island. So I have a much more vivid picture of the milieu that she came from, which really also enriches my reading of for instance, crossing the mangrove, because she mentions Marie-Galante several times. I am much more aware of her daring in writing, daring to write Ségou, which is such a tremendous accomplishment. So she looks at microhistory of a family, the Traorés, and she puts that amidst global history, where Mali is being put under siege from two sides by Islam that is going to the south and trying to convert people, and the family is split, kingdoms are split. At the same time, colonialism from Europe is impinging upon them. So it is such a very rich history. And now I'm much more aware, having begun to write myself in a more literary way. I'm trying to switch from my academic voice to a more literary voice. I'm much more aware of what she's doing. And one of the things that strikes me in her style is the personalization of natural phenomena. So she is talking about the wind and the sun and the stars as beings. So the sun is climbing the steps of the palace. And she says such beautiful things about the wind too. So it is a totally different experience reading it now.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Ayana, see you nodding like, Do you want to weigh in?
Yes, I think what I liked most of her work is that deep dive she takes into history. And I think everyone who's writing a book will know how difficult it is to research, especially if you are going like far, far, far back in time. And I think in one of her quotes, she said, I come from communities where oral, kind of telling history is more dominant than writing. So it's also like mind-blowing to see how she combined both of them, because this kind of descriptions, it comes also from the oral way of telling, you know, a very poetic way of using words. And I admire also her courage, like not being, you know, from the continental Africa, but from the diaspora, and taking this deep research into the history of Africa. I think for all of us to understand where we came from, and it also goes back, I think, to the quotes I chose for the opening, because she, through all, I think, her work, she's still struggling like with this myth of Africa, you know, like especially the time she lived after the independence wars, you know, like with Kwame Nkrumah and all these leaders who, I think my generation, like we grew up idealizing them and, you know, like thinking, oh, they are the godfathers of Africa and stuff. And I think reading this kind of books makes us understand the complexity of that time and also the still complex time we live in. So I think if you want to learn from history, you have to read, I think, this kind of books. And we are blessed to have someone who took this responsibility, I think, to give us all of her work, you know, like she presented like a gift, I think, for all of us to carry on. And I take also inspiration in my own work. Because it's also what I'm trying to do, like go back in history, you know, like and see what are the constructs that we were taught and try to deconstruct them and think about, okay, so there's not one reality. I think there are so many reality and so many complex chapters of the history of Africa, and I'm just generalizing, I think, but the same story will go, I think, for a lot of African countries, yeah.
So this is, because we're cutting it 10 minutes short because of like the changes and all the things in the program. So this would have been the moment where we would have a change in panels.
Oh,
And
really?
see.
Here.
Listen, I know this one would say that. So this would be the moment where we would ask Professor Wecker, oh, thank you so much for your contribution, but her contribution is just too delicious. So we don't really want her to go. But we do want to also welcome the next one. So my suggestion would be that you don't go anywhere. But we welcome the next person, Domenica Gidai-Bidu, who is a member of the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance. If you can come up, a legend. They're whispering. Nobody wants to leave the panel. I also don't want them to leave the panel. But I do want to give, because I'm a big fan of short biographies, but I do want to share a story about Miss Domenica. So it's not working, that mic?
No, it's okay.
It's okay? Okay. And so Natifa Elshot and I, of the Belmer Bookstore, we went to Finland, of all places. That's a whole different story. But in Finland, there was a conference. People were giving the most amazing presentations. And there was this powerhouse, this chief of all fights against injustice, pro-humanity, pro-liberation, and she gave so many amazing gems she shared with us. And Atifa and I were looking at her, we were like, who is this lady? Imagine if we would have such a lady in the Netherlands. And we looked at her, looking, and then after the conference, so we see her in the hallway, we gather our courage to approach her and to ask her a question. Then something happens, so her phone rings, and she picks up the phone, and she speaks in Dutch. And we were like, hold up. So the woman we were wishing for all along was in our midst all this time. I think you are fantastic. Thank you so much for joining the panel. Great honor. So my first question to you would have been, thinking back to the 80s, coming back here now, what has changed in your rereadings of the work of Maryse Condé when you started reading their work? I wanted to calculate, are the 80s 40 years ago?
Yeah.
That's a whole different, festival.
So this is the copy I bought 40 years ago.
40 years ago.
Yeah, I bought this. So, and I have all the signs in it. And it was the period, it's grandmothers are talking kind of things. And that was the period in which a couple of Black African Caribbean writers were famous in the Netherlands as well. And as Professor Wecker, Gloria said, it was also read by many white people. So I think many people of my generation have read Segu because it was a rainbow pocket. It cost only 9 guilders before the euro, you know. And it was in the Bruna and at all stations. So Segu was everywhere. And it was published, so it was part of our, well, cultural heritage, let's just say. And there was Buchi Emecheta as well, other South African writers. So there was an African literature, especially of black women, black women from the African diaspora, which was read in mainstream the Netherlands. It's really crazy to think about it. It's and as if there has been after that a period in which there was no African women writers. So that was really something which was read, and it was also read at the universities as well as literature and things like that. So that has really formed our imagination. And your question about how is it for me to read it again, as all of you said, reading it back now, especially now that the whole issue on slavery is more mainstream, I think I would really recommend everyone to read it because it shows also, because Ayan and I come from the Horn of Africa, and our discussion on the whole narrative of transatlantic slavery is a different story. But we have also a slavery history that our children and our grandchildren don't know. And that's the whole Arab slavery. It's all the Horn of Africa slavery. It's about the Indian Ocean slavery, in which the slavery was different. It was with Arab countries, look at, and things like that. So, and that was different. And the same thing of the role of Morocco, for example, in slavery. And so, and the whole, and what's really amazing of Segu is that it shows about people from high-ranking, the Bambara, which were rich, but also the people who were also treated as slaves within the African continent. Because I remember, I come from Eritrea, East Africa. In Ethiopia, slavery was only abolished in 1942 or 43. So until then, you had enslaved persons, black people, who were in conquering, when there was wars, they were treated as slaves. So the whole slavery issue, the whole colonization issue is such, it has a different dimension than we really realize. So what does vibrate in me, in my system, when I talk about these issues? So, and even though the Eastern African narrative was not very visible in Segu, it gives a much more sophisticated, detailed, problematic, also the gender relationship, but at the same time, also in Segu, the sexual liberated feeling about what women can do, and also what they do as being able, what we now call double blood, it was then called mulatta. So our narrative also has changed. So it's amazing to read it back after 40, because the past 40 years I haven't read it. So I read it back this summer. So that was very good.
Maboula, I remember from an interview you talked about how you can tell it much more funny than I can, your first encounter with Maryse Condé, and how you didn't know her, and she recommended you Segu. And what was your reaction again when she recommended you Segu?
I'm trying to phrase it politely,
Yes,
but
please.
it was happening in my mind. What I was thinking when she said, because I met her, like the location matters, I met Maryse Condé in New York. I was part of an exchange program from Paris, and I had never heard of her, never read her, of course. And I ran into her after a conference, a tribute to her, a conference as a tribute to her that I did not attend, that I did not care for, and I just came to the cocktail, the after-conference cocktail, to grab free food because I was broke. And she was, yes, that's the truth. And she was, nice enough to talk to all the students that were around and asking questions about us and what we were doing in New York, what we were studying. And then as she heard my last name, she said, "Oh, are you from Mali?" And I said, "No, my family is from the Ivory Coast." And that's when she said, "You need," that's how she phrased it, "you need or you must read Segu." And so in my mind, I was like, what is she talking about? Like, I don't care. You know, what is this? I'm in New York. I'm free. I've escaped from both France and the Ivory Coast. I'm in this new place where I can reinvent myself. Don't take me back. Don't take me back. So I was like, yeah. But what I answered to her was like, yeah, sure, will do. Yeah. And I did not read Ségou for another 2 or 3 years. And when I did, it was such a shock. So my context is different from what you've just said about the 80s. I did not read it. I didn't.
Does that mean that she wasn't well read in France?
She wasn't taught. I never heard of her. And again, I met her as she was already teaching at Columbia University when I met her, and I'm talking about the late 1990s, right? And so she was a totally unknown, perhaps because Ségou was a bestseller in France at the time, but as you just said, I think that memory had been totally wiped out.
Yeah.
So in my generation, I had never heard of Maryse Condé. I had never read Ségou, or, you know, among other things. Like at the same time, Edouard Glissant was teaching in New York. I had never heard of Edouard Glissant either. And so it's interesting to see that both of them, among others, were in exile, kind of, and they had obtained those prestigious academic positions that they had never obtained in France.
No.
Yeah, both of them retired in US institutions.
Wow.
You know? So I read Ségou like a few years after the original encounter, and then I took a seminar with Maryse Condé, and then we stayed in touch until she passed away last year. And it's I don't know if that answers your question, but there's something I want to say. I think that what I like most, for having read most of her work, not all of them, but most of her books, and studied her, what I like most is her irreverence. She's such an irreverent, you know, writer, like really able to offer, you know, a deep critique of power. So that's what she does constantly from book number one. I think that she's also a great humanizer. That I don't know, that Reparation may seem as a literary project, in the way she characterizes her, I mean, the figures peopling her books is a way to give them, on the basis of history, to retrieve the humanity of those who have been enslaved, therefore who have been dehumanized. And I think that the third point is that she's a great storyteller. Like she's you know, like a great storyteller filled with, you know, movement. She's really a navigator of the African diaspora. You read her books and you go from one place to the next, one island to the other, one continent to the other, and she takes you, you know, like Tituba is one of the greatest examples, but I also have in mind the character of Sélanir. I don't know if the book has been translated in English, but it's Sélanir Koukoupé, and it's the story of a woman who launches on a plan of vengeance over 3 continents. Like there's a problem that she wants to solve. She's been wronged, and she'll go to that place. She'll go to Africa. She'll go to the Americas. She might have one stop in North and South America and the Caribbean, just to launch that vengeance. Yeah, and then she gets married and has a kid. Like, I'm done. I'm done. Now I can live my life. But the fact that she traveled the world because I'm going to take care of so and so. I love so I love the movement. To me, Maryse Condé is really a writer of the diaspora. Like, she's a writer of the diaspora. She goes all over the place, and I think I mean, that's what matters to me. That and her irreverence. She's you know,
Iconoclast, I find.
Yeah, you know, and she's a little, you know, bitchy. She's not nice. Her characters are not nice, and they're free, and they, you know, they're not respectable. No. They don't want to be respectable most of the time, right? And then we have the, you know, Ségou, which occupies a particular place, which to me amazes me in terms of the work that she has produced. It is a lot of work. Like, this needs to be commended. I don't know how she did it. And I think that by offering her interpretation of the history of this African diaspora has gone through her own research. Segou could have been a PhD dissertation in history, and then she has chosen literature, and I think way before people such as Saidiya Hartman.
Absolutely, the critical fabulation.
Exactly. To
is
me,
what she's doing.
yeah, she's like,
Yeah.
maybe history is not enough. So to understand, you know, as it was mentioned in the readings we had in the opening, we will not be able to, I don't know, write and circulate that history if we do not retrieve the humanity of those enslaved people. Otherwise, they will remain enslaved people. So let me imagine, you know, their personal trajectories, their feelings, their contradictions, their paradoxes, and I will humanize them. And so, some of them you will hate. There are characters in Segou that I hate. Some of them you will, you will love, but they are humans, and therefore they are not perfect. And let me tell you, the history through literature, because history will, the archive is too empty. We will never recover that history. So, but literature will allow me to tell that story and that history. Yeah.
I see you two nodding, all of three of you
Yes.
nodding.
Amen, amen.
Ahmed, yes.
Yeah, I think our archives are empty. I think that's something that I think all of us will agree on it. And literature is a way of refilling that in a way also that it doesn't have to be like the same, like, you know, everything that has happened. So taking the liberty as a writer, you know, just to reimagine some kind of historical facts, or maybe try to pick and choose, you know, like which parts of the history that you want to highlight. And I think if you have the gender lens also, that it's a different, another layer that will help you understand her work. And she's writing about West Africa, but it's the same for Somalia, for example. Now there we had, you know, like there's the colonization of Somalia, almost 100 years, and then there's like 9 years of very baby democracy, like just, you know, like the first president was chosen, and then his follower was killed, and then the dictatorship, and then a civil war. So as a Somali woman, if you want to go back in history and learn about, okay, what happened, you know, like how was the life, or what about the slavery history of Somalia? What about the traditional aspects of being, you know, like a Somali person? And you cannot find it anywhere. So you have to go take a very, very deep dive. And that's why this kind of books are also, like, I think, inspirational sources for writers. Yeah.
I have read one of the last book. It's the Gospel for the New World, and for me, I didn't expect. I chose not to read any a book critics on it, so I said I'll just pick this book and read it. And I was so much surprised how Christianity is in the source, because if you don't know all the characters in the Bible, you will miss half of the book. Because, but at the same time, it's really, as you said, it's a critic on what really the Bible says, and how certain figures, how symbols are used, and how the power of symbols, like, and then how this search for why am I on this world, and what is my role I have to play, and the role of language. That was, as the two ladies also before us was saying, that she says, I'm not doing it in French, it's Maryse Condé. That's who I am. Of course, there is a lot of Creole, but at the same time, it is her way of interpreting it. And how she's very bold in saying, so French, even though it's the language of the oppressor, of the colonizer, it's mine now. So how she possesses the language on her own way. So this freedom of ownership, of really agency, is amazing. And as you said, the humor was, then there was a bird who became vegetarian and choose not to eat worms anymore. So, and what it meant for this bird. So it's really crazy things like that. Or you have character. So there is so much fantasy and freedom and and for me, I would really recommend people who have religious affiliations to read that book, because it poses certain questions. For example, many religious people say, why is there, for example, slavery if God treats us as all as equal? So she poses that question, but in a different way. And so freedom means that God is not going to solve your problems. It's up to you to do it. So those kind of challenging issues. So that's really the broadness of the discussion. And as you were discussing about why was her book on, as in Tituba, as you said, her work criticized in Africa, like Segu, but you have the same problem also because people from the Caribbean are criticizing her. They are saying, you are a diaspora, you live in New York, so are you a Caribbean or are you a diaspora? So this is sometimes also problematic, like we want to really freeze identities and which cannot be frozen. So a Guadeloupean diaspora woman living in the diaspora has her language, has her imagination and her own right to talk about all stories, and no one can force her not to do. So this kind of agency, it's amazing in how she does her work.
Yeah, I find that this problem is part of a larger problem, like how we deal with each other in the Black diaspora, and what power relationships are going on there. And so to me, that is a very interesting topic, because we see it to this day, that there is a great egalitarianism within the Black diaspora, which you can see, for instance, at who gets money to do research, to write, stuff like that. It's very painful to see. And then when you put that against that history, you know, from negritude, which is kind of a European take on Black nationalism, there's different movements going on in our relationship, especially African-American relationships to Africa, which sometimes entail appropriation, like this is our kind of country, the mother country, and then to see it flip, as Maryse also has seen in her life, you know, culture is much more important. We are not one and the same. We need to look at the differences between us too.
But I think, you know, like, despite what you've just, you know, both said, there's this haunting of the African continent. There's a lot of critique. There's a lot of, there are many disillusions. You know, I went to, was disappointed, which did not make me come back to hexagonal France, where that was of no interest. I went to the Americas in general, and in the US in particular. But I think that throughout the novels, until the end, there are always references to Segu in particular.
Everywhere.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
By some you know, character named Traoré, some you know, mentioning of Segu. There's like, it lingers. So it's like, despite the disillusion, despite the disappointment, despite the tensions between the continent and the diaspora that she belongs to, there's this towering figure of Africa, encompassed in this you know, metaphor of Segu that has remained. That has remained no matter what. It's like it's the place that is always mentioned, the place that is desired, discussed, critiqued, the place of return, eventual or not. But always this question: should I go back? Somebody always says, should I go back to Segu? You know, and throughout the years, in the excerpt that I chose was from a book, En attendant la montée des eaux, that was published in 2010, and there are still Traoré characters, and one of them finds himself in trouble and wonders, should I go back to Segu? And his mother says, who had married somebody from Mali, says, don't ever go back to Ségou. There's nothing left for us in Ségou.
Ah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's not. Ségou is a place of death.
Yeah.
I want to mention the first
I
lines.
knew you would. Yes, please.
Let me see if I can find them. Okay. First lines of Ségou. It starts out like this. Ségou is the garden of the seed. Ségou is built on betrayal. Talk about Ségou outside of Ségou. But don't talk about Ségou in Ségou.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, you also wanted, because
Yeah.
we have, exactly, look at this picture.
Oh.
Amazing.
Yeah.
We have 2 more minutes to go.
2 more minutes.
2 more
Oh.
minutes.
Let's do another one. Go ahead.
So I think it means that there has to be a part 2,
Yeah.
and we will
Sure.
gather at another space, but I wanted to give you the last word.
Yeah. Oh, wow. There are 2 thoughts. I wanted maybe just to briefly go back to the point of who gets to write whose story, especially if you are from the diaspora. When I was writing my book, there's a question, like that kept on coming back to me, because you have the readers who are going to read the book, you have the people you are writing the book about, who are people who are in Somalia, partly from diaspora, partly are from the city itself, Mogadishu. And at the end, I chose to write the story like I see it, like my experience, but I was very transparent about my process. Like this is not the story of everybody in Mogadishu and stuff. And I think it will be, when I read the work of Maryse Condé, I was so inspired also like by her. She was so bold, like, okay, I'm writing this book and I'm going back in history. And it's, I think, something that the African diaspora, we need to have more discussions about that kind of, I think, issues, like who get to write whose book. And the other thing is just maybe a very silly comment, because you were reading about Ségou and how she described it. And then Wakanda came to mind, and which is, I think, a fantasy that is completely, I think, opposite to the reality. It's a very silly comment, but it's just something that came to my mind.
The woman warrior.
Yeah, and because we have the Hollywood narrative of what Africa is, and we have the complex reality and history of Africa, and that's why I think we should embrace writers who write about the complexity of Africa and keep on owning these stories, I think, and also owning our tragedy. So Africa's beautiful. I love Africa, like I'm African, I'm part Africanist, but still there are so many problematic issues and tragedies and pain and, like crimes that were done to African people by African people also at the same time. So we need to own them as well, I think. And as a writers, I think it's a very big responsibility to do that, but also I think a privilege, and hopefully we can produce more of these stories, because we need them, all of us. Yeah.
Wonderful.
It was an absolute joy to listen to you.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank
a warm
you
round
so
of
much.
applause.
Thank you.
You can go ahead. You can stand and get your applause. Another round of applause. Thank you so much for your attentive listening, and have a pleasant rest of the festival. Enjoy your day.
We change like the weather. I just can't keep waiting on you. Really see God made a